Hello, everyone. I am excited today to talk to you about swim form and stroke technique. And our focus today is going to be on the propulsion phases, specifically the forces that are involved in propulsion, and in particular the catch, pull finish, and recovery phases. Now, recovery phase is not necessarily specific to propulsion, but it has a big part in the catch and pull phases. So that's why I'm going to cover it in today's talk. Okay, so let's just jump right into it. We're going to start off with the catch phase. And the catch phase is probably the most important phase in terms of setting you up for the pull phase, which is the primary way in which you get propulsion through the arm stroke. Now, the catch phase really is defined by what's known as early vertical forearm, or EVF. And the characteristics of that particular position in the catch phase is the high elbow position. And you can see here in this picture that the person's elbow is higher than their wrist, which is key to the EVF formation. And also the visualization of your arm going over a barrel, and the curl of that arm going over the barrel is another reference point when you talk about the early vertical forearm. And when you're in this position, you can easily create a paddle with the hand and the forearm here through the catch phase leading into the pull phase, which are critical for creating propulsion. In addition, you also want to be sure as you have gone through your entry phase that you have a nice long extended arm so you can take advantage of the leverage that you get in your chest and lat muscles from that nice long extension just before the catch phase. And finally, you want to think about in this catch phase that your hand is anchored to your forearm, so there's no bend here at the wrist, and so your hand doesn't drop from the wrist. Think of your forearm and your hand as one long paddle. And then as you begin this phase, your forearm and hand will pivot around the elbow. So you will see a drop from the elbow down through the end of the fingertips, and that will start creating that paddle formation as you go into your pull. So definitely keep a really good focus on the catch as you lead into the pull, because it sets up the pull very nicely when you can create a nice high arm position and leverage those chest and lat muscles. Okay, so when you look at this from two different perspectives, one is kind of the most common issue when we're talking about the catch position, and that is that low elbow. So you have your shoulder position up in here and the elbow's dropping below that, and then your forearm and hand ski upwards. So this creates a lot of problems in terms of creating propulsion. Primarily, it really delays how long it takes you to get from this position into your pull position. If you want to think of a skier on a downhill or on an uphill slope, having to go up the uphill slope, up and over the top and down the bottom, the other side, that's kind of what you're dealing with here in terms of a visual, versus the swimmer on the right. They're already in high elbow position, elbows in line with the shoulder here, and their forearm and hand are starting that ski down the slope. Okay, so they're already creating that curl around the barrel, and it's much easier to create a good pull, and effective and productive pull when you're in this position in the catch phase than when you're in this position in the catch phase. There's also some issues with drag and a few other complications that I'll go into in a different presentation. So Good contrast between the two. This is the person on the left is has the most common problem that you'll see and that you'll need to correct. Okay, same visual, only as they're swimming, which is always good to see somebody in action. So again, elbow drops, hand skis upward, takes a long time to get through that to that pull phase, and ultimately it leads to some critical errors in the pull phase, which I'll go through in a second. And then over here you can see the correct form, nice high elbow position, able to maintain a high turnover rate and create that paddle formation. Okay. All right, so obviously if you have this type of issue, such as the person on the left, then we need to figure out how to correct that issue because you want to be able to swim more productively and efficiently. So there are a few drills that you can focus on to help correct this EVF problem that you may have. And they include the fist sculling and fist paddle fulcrum drill. And all of these drills really focus on getting you to get a good feel for the water along the hand and the forearm while getting a bend at the elbow or creating that high elbow position. Keep in mind that your hand creates about 60–70% of all the force during the catch and the pull phases. And so it's really important to have good hand position and creating that full paddle as you go through the catch phase. Okay, so each one of these drills are in a handout that accompany this presentation, and I'm not going to review those specifically here because they're all reviewed in the handout, and how you do the drill and how you incorporate that into swim workouts. Okay, all right, so let's move on to the next phase of propulsion, which is the pull and finish phase. And the pull phase is just an extension of your catch, so that's why making the catch phase is so critical. Making it correct is so critical because it winds up setting you up well for the pull phase. So the first thing you want to consider when you look at the pull phase is making sure that your hand is in line with the shoulder as you begin the pull. Again, it leads back to the idea of leveraging your lats and chest muscles for optimizing those forces. So you can have a little bit of variation with that where the hand drifts a little bit inwards towards the midline or a little bit extended outwards as you begin the pull. But for the most part, you want to stay in line with the shoulder to optimize that leverage. And again, focus on arm curling over top of the barrel. And you can see that in this still picture here. Okay. And then another key to propulsion through the pull phase is that you accelerate through the phase. So at this point in the phase, the acceleration is slower than it will be at this point in the phase. So as you continue through the pull, you accelerate all the way until you get to the point where you're going to finish and exit the water. Okay. All right, a few other key elements that you want to think about during the pull phase is you don't want to lead with the elbow, and you can see that in this picture here. Okay, so as she goes through her pull phase, her elbow is leading the arm backwards versus having the hand and elbow lead together. So at this point in the stroke, you can see here in the picture, the elbow and the hand for the swimmer should all be in alignment or close to alignment at this phase. When you're not and the elbow is leading the arm, you get what's known as slip, and essentially you're not creating a nice paddle formation to get as good amount of force on the water as you pull through. The water is actually slipping underneath your hand and your forearm as you pull backwards. So you definitely want to avoid that. And typically, swimmers who have a low elbow during their catch will have this problem during their pull phase. So palm is always facing backwards through the pull phase. So you can see in this particular case, this swimmer, her palm was facing down towards the bottom at an angle. not backwards, because you're trying to go horizontally through the water, right? Not vertically. And then you also want to finish the pull at your hip so you exit past the hip. And I'll get into that a little bit more detail in some pictures here in a minute. Okay, so let's take a look at some common issues with the pull. So you see all those here on the left, and then you see the correct form on your right. So a couple of common issues. The top two pictures, you have a pull that is really wide, way outside the shoulders, and then the one on the right is a crossover underneath the body and crossing over the midline of the body. Both don't take advantage of that leverage that you'll get from staying in line with the shoulder during the pull, that leverage you get from utilizing your lats and chest muscle, so and your rhomboids. Okay, and then you have a straight arm pull here, which creates a lot of issues, including some drag, and then you just don't get that ability to have a higher turnover. It takes longer to go through this stroke than it does a bent elbow stroke. And we've already kind of covered the idea of leading with your elbow and the problems related to that. So when you talk about doing this pull phase correctly, then you have a couple of pictures that accentuate that. You have a nice bent elbow during the pull, and that elbow degree can be anywhere from 100 to 120 degrees. It doesn't have to be 110 as the picture depicts. And that varies depending on your style of swimmer and your flexibility and so on. Talked about this individual here and the arcing position over the barrel. And when you talk about the slip issue that I mentioned here with leading with the elbow, this is that corrected. So you can see here that essentially the shoulder and the elbow and the hand and forearm are all in alignment. So that creates a nice paddle formation and a lot of force being generated on the water. Okay, so when we want to take a look at that in motion, then we see this person on the left, definitely a low drop in the elbow to start with, skiing in the catch phase, which leads directly to the elbow leading the hand and forearm backwards. So they're getting that slip in the water, not creating a nice paddle formation. Versus on the right, you can see nice high elbow position, elbows anchored in the forearm and hand drop off of that anchor and hinge downward to create a paddle. And then as she pulls backwards, that elbow, hand, forearm all get in alignment as she gets to the shoulder during the pull. So good visual to see the difference between the two. Okay, so when you talk about some of the other issues with the pull, you wind up having pulls that are outside the shoulder area or fall over the midline, pulling underneath the body. This particular person on the left has the straight arm pull, which is outside the shoulder, compared to the person on the right, which is got a pull that's nice and aligned with the shoulder. Good high elbow position. So she's taking advantage of those lat muscles and rhomboids and traps as she pulls, versus this person on the left is not. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some good information on the catch and the pull and some visualizations with that. The pull, the corrections for the pull are very similar to the corrections with the catch phase in terms of the type of drills that you can do, a fist drill with paddles, but you can also do some vertical sculling as opposed to catch sculling that you would do for the catch phase. And again, these are all covered in the these are all covered in the handout that I'm providing for you. That's going to accompany this this video. Okay, so let's talk about recovery. So recovery is kind of the least complicated issue and to correct, but it also has probably the least effect on the overall efficiency and effectiveness of your stroke. So there are definitely things that you can correct, that you want to ensure that you're doing it correctly. So we're going to talk about those now. So the first one is really the point at which your hand is going to exit the water. And of all points of the recovery, this is the most important and definitely something you want to be sure you're correcting. So you can see on the left, the person, as they start to recover and exit the water, their hand is beginning to exit right before their hip, versus the person on the left is definitely going to exit at or past the hip. Okay. Which is very critical because that's the full extension of the pull. And that means you're optimizing that pull. Okay. And in a video sense, you can see that here. So the person on the left hand exits right before the hip. And then you can see on the right, the person's fingertips gets past the hip and then exit the water. So again, you're optimizing that pull phase and really accentuating the ability to get a lot of force throughout the entire stroke. Okay. So when you're talking about recovery, there are certain elements that make up a good recovery, and I outlined those here. First is shoulder rotation. Good shoulder rotation helps you to come up over the top of your arc as you recover. And so you don't wind up having this really wide, sort of large wingspan recovery that's really low to the water, which creates a lot of issues with entry and involves a lot of extra energy to do that type of recovery. And I'll show you that here in a second. You want generally a high and slightly open elbow position, and high being it's higher than the hand. That varies quite a bit. There's not an exact angle that you want that to be at, but in general, the elbow is above the hand, and or vice versa, hand below the elbow. And then this will lead to near full extension at injury. So a good recovery will lead to this full extension. And there's some issues with entry points that are really close to the head or that are really too extended, where you're almost straight arm entering into the water. Okay, so when you look at the recovery, this is kind of the extreme with this person here. They have a really high arm recovery. Wrist, hand is above the elbow, versus the person on the right has the more traditional and what is generally recommended for the wrist to be below the elbow. And again, a lot more issues related to shoulder injuries, fatigue in the shoulders, and you can see that here on the left with the person with a high arm recovery. You also might have some injuries over time with this type of recovery versus the more traditional recovery. In a different presentation, I will talk about the variations for open water swimming versus pool swimming with the recovery. There's some times when you want a little bit higher recovery, more arcing recovery than you want kind of a traditional pool swim recovery. But we'll talk about that in that presentation. Okay, so when you're talking about making corrections to your recovery, here's some drills that you can do. The zipper drill, the fingertip drill, shoulder touch drill, and all these drills are really related to accentuating that high elbow, low hand or arm, wrist position. So make sure that, again, you pay attention to those drills in the handout. Okay, one element I did not talk about throughout this whole presentation is flexibility. And certainly flexibility plays a big part in any part of any phases of the stroke. From extension to catch, pull, recovery. And when you look at these two individuals here, this is an assessment that can be done to kind of give you a basis for how flexible you are in the shoulders. And the shoulders are probably the primary area in which, if you have poor flexibility, you may wind up having some form issues. And if you have good flexibility, you're less likely to have form issues, or they're easier to correct. So this individual on the left is touching their fingers, and actually that is pretty good flexibility. The criteria for having good flexibility is if you can put a fist length between your hands like this, you have average flexibility. If you can touch fingers, or in the case of the person on the right, where you can actually interlace your fingers, this person on the right has very good flexibility. So do this on both sides, both shoulders. That way you can get an idea of if one side, one shoulder versus the other is more flexible or less flexible. So, and if you find that you have some inflexibility on either shoulder or both, then certainly engage in an upper body stretching routine, which incorporates shoulder stretching. And do that after all your workouts, particularly your swim workouts. Okay, so I'm going to leave you with just this visual. This individual, a lot of the issues that we talked about in terms of the catch, pull, and finish phase and recovery, you can see in this individual, very straight arm position, leading with the elbow as he pulls backwards. And compared to this person, which has a nice high elbow position through the catch and maintains good bent elbow through the pull and keeps that hand in alignment with the shoulder and finishes well past the hip. So hopefully the information you got from this presentation will help you to become a better swimmer. And I look forward to talking to you next time.